Welcome to Robotics and Automation News webinars, where you can be part of a global event without leaving your home or office. Attend our live webinars and communicate directly with influential professionals in your industry.
Hello, my name is Abdul Montakim. I'm editor of Robotics and Automation News.com. In this interview, I speak to Esben Østergaard, who, as many of you will know, is the inventor of the Universal Robot's collaborative robotic arm, the machine which has changed the world of industrial robotics. Espen has moved on from Universal Robots now, but I couldn't help asking him about his background before discussing his current projects and concerns.
So my name is Esben Østergaard. I'm currently the CEO and founder of Reinvest Robotics, where we invest in robot startups. And previously, I'm mostly known for having founded Universal Robots and worked there for 15 years, scaling it up from zero to what it is more or less today. I have a PhD in robotics and a long technical background before that.
Yeah, it's a fantastic achievement. I'm sure everybody would acknowledge your contribution to robotics, contribution of Universal Robots to the entire robotics industry, as you know better than I. All of the other robot companies, industrial robotics companies, which have been around for many decades, uh, kind of producing the same kind of robots every year, have now released what are called collaborative robots in response to, I imagine, and I'm sure it's true that it's in response to what Universal Robots did in creating what's called a collaborative robots. For those who don't know in the audience, a collaborative robot is a completely different type of robot, which is ISO certified. It's a specific definition for a collaborative robot, which means that you can work directly with it. It's not dangerous in the way that the traditional robots are. But Esben, you can explain a little bit about that before we go on to your new activities. Explain a little bit of background, how you developed the robot, what gave you the idea to make that robot. Obviously, this is the first time we're interviewing you, so that's why I'm asking kind of, something that maybe a lot of people already know. But please tell us the story.
Yeah, so interesting you mentioned the ISO certification of the collaborative robot, because actually when we started Universal Robots, we didn't know much about the regulation and the standards related to robot safety, which is something we learned about a lot later. But we did see a huge need for making a robot that was easier to move around and easier to redeploy than the existing robots. We did some studies on the local industry here in Denmark, and we could see that they had a need for more flexible solutions than the ones offered by traditional robotic automation. They basically needed to redeploy the robot every week or every month to do a similar but new task, and that was not possible with the existing solutions at that time. So we decided to make a robot that gave the factory floor that ability to quickly install and reconfigure the robots to do new tasks, which of course it's hugely beneficial for companies that have more varying productions, that don't necessarily produce exactly the same item, many years in a row, but have more varying manufacturing. And actually, it turns out a lot of companies work more like that than you can say the more traditional automotive type, where they just produce the same thing many years in a row in a very, let me say, fixed and hardly automated manufacturing lines. So that's where this collaboration between humans and robots came in, where humans are good at some things, robots are good at some other things. And if the human can quickly use the robot to do the more repetitive tasks, then that creates a huge value for typically the small and medium-sized manufacturing companies. So that was the need we saw, and then we tried to make a robot that met that need. And it took us some years, hard work from 2005 to 2008, where we really, tried our best to make these robots, and in the end, it kind of worked. I mean, we did have a prototype that did do the job, and from there on, it transitioned. Universal Robots transitioned from being more like a garagey university type company to being, a business where we got a CEO, we hired sales teams, we grew the company with several 100% growth every year. And we did that for a lot of years in a row. So explosive growth over an extended period of time. And so today, Universal Robots is the leader in this new space of robotics now called collaborative robots, which of course didn't exist when we started the robot. And I've seen more than 150 competing products on the market today. And it's still a very steeply growing market.
That's amazing. I mean, you've everything about it is amazing. The development of it, the astronomical success of it. We did interview someone from your company at least 5 years ago, I think, and he explained that the growth has been phenomenal. And did that catch you by surprise? Let's talk about that first. Did the success of the robot surprise you?
No, but we also didn't know so much about it when we started. I mean, it was more or less my first job out of university. I did spend a lot of years at the university, and I did have some student jobs along the way. But I have more of an academic background than you can say commercial background or industrial background. So for me, I didn't really know what to expect. I just saw a huge need in the market. And then we made a product that met that need. And actually, initially, we had expected bigger growth than what we ended up with. So yeah, it didn't really surprise me. But I now I know how incredibly lucky we were. But at that time, I kind of just assumed it would go well.
I don't think luck has a lot to do with anything in life. If you put
luck and hard work.
Yeah, if you produce a good product, I think that's the key to everything, really. Producing a good product that does the job at a price point that people can accept. Price points, I mean, aside, the other robots the other robotics companies were just not producing anything like this. Has that surprised you as well, that the other robot companies, I'm talking about the established, I don't want to name them, but the established leaders in the industrial robotic arm sector, has that surprised you that they've launched their own collaborative robots? And I didn't know that there were 150 other similar products now, whereas there were none before apart from yours. Now there are 150. How is the competition kind of, how is, I imagine Universal Robots is doing well even against all of that massive competition now.
Yes, I mean, Universal Robots is still dominating the market. Yeah, I mean, the established robot manufacturers come from a completely different background, you can say. I mean, robotics as such has a long history. It started in the arts, where you can say Da Vinci built a mechanical statue you can say a lot of years ago, and he was not trying to make a factory worker in that time. He was trying to explore what it is to be a human. And similar to the book Rossum's Universal Robots, which was published exactly, it's a theater play that published 100 years ago this year, also introduced the word robot. But in that play, it's not about making a factory machine or factory automation or any useful machine. It's more like exploring what it is to be human. So it's the word robots and robotics comes from the tradition of us trying to mirror ourselves through technology in some way. And that's kind of what also makes robotics so fascinating. But in the 60s and 70s, the technology reached a maturity level where it began to be useful in typically automotive companies. So the Unimate from General Motors was introduced, I think it was 1964 or something like that, and was the first, you can say, automotive robot. And since then, in the coming years from 60s to 80s, a lot of robot companies popped up around the world, but they were all aimed at the automotive market. So automotive market is characterized with they kind of know what kind of product they want to make for the next many years. They know, when to build a new model, how to automate, and so on. So the type of robots that is needed in this environment is, you can say, fixed installations that can take a long time to install, maybe half a year or so, and then they run for 7 years. And uptime is utmost importance, reliability is utmost importance, but flexibility is not super important, and redeployability is also not super important. So that's where robotics came from. In the sales process for these kinds of companies, they have these huge automation houses that build this new factory for the next car model, and in their whole, you can say, sales process, sales cycle, and the thinking, uh, and the sales organization also for the robot manufacturers, it's just very different from catering to the needs to the small and medium-sized companies that typically have much shorter timelines and much shorter, you can say, deployment times for these robots. So they can't wait a year or half a year for the machine to be up and running, and they need to be able to reconfigure or redeploy it within days rather than within months. So I think that's one of the reasons why the big uh, established robot manufacturers did not really get into this collaborative robot space in the beginning, because it doesn't match their sales model basically, and they probably didn't even hear the need from their customers. So I'm not too surprised about that. There was actually a European level project going on in those days called SME Robot, which was exactly how do we make a robot that caters to the needs of the small and medium-sized businesses. And it was more or less a robot like the one Universal Robots ended up building. So there was some European level research going on. I was not involved in it in any way. Actually, a lot of the big established robot manufacturers were involved in that project, but nothing really came out of it in the end.
Well, that's it's quite interesting, and also interesting that the car maker, or rather the industrial robot makers that traditionally have supplied car makers, have moved into the collaborative robot space. There are applications, as you know, even in automotive factories for this kind of robot. I've seen videos where universal robotic arms have been used to, for example, apply glue on windscreens so that the windscreen can be then placed on the car. Things like that. There are lots of smaller jobs, as you well know, that this kind of robot is being put to use for, which previously either a human did or maybe wasn't done in the same way. So it's been a very, as I say, very interesting time for robotic arms. And I'm glad that, we've been publishing throughout that time, and I'm glad we're seeing companies that have been fairly, I don't want to be sort of unkind to them, but they've been samey for many, many years, possibly decades, now becoming a little bit more dynamic and innovative than previously they were. So that's a great contribution to the industry. What's your involvement now with Universal Robots? I know that they at some point got acquired by a company called Teradyne, which is a US company, I believe, and they bought Universal Robots and a couple of other robotics companies, Mobile Industrial Robots, which is a autonomous mobile robot maker for AMRs for warehouses, and there was one other one, I can't remember which one it is now. But what's your involvement with Universal Robots now?
Well, I mean, you're right. We sold the Universal Robots to Teradyne in 2015, and since then I did stay on board for a number of years. I think 4 years after, until 2019, I was still working at Universal Robots, even though there was nothing binding me there. But it was very hard for me to let go, of course. But in the end, I had to conclude it's not my company anymore. We sold it, so it was time to move on for me. Interesting you mentioned mobile industrial robots, because when we sold the Universal Robots, I invested some of the money we got out of that into mobile industrial robots, and was one of the owners of that until we sold this company also to Teradyne. So what I do, I mean, I do occasionally do work for Universal Robots still. I do have some occasional consultancy work for them. But most of my time these days, I work in Reinvest Robotics, which is, you could say, our new startup accelerator or incubator for robotics companies. And basically, when I had sold Universal Robots, I was a little bit, you could say, in trouble. I didn't know what the purpose of my life was and where to go from here. And my wife, she showed me these UN sustainability goals, and she showed me number one, and she asked me, what are you going to do about that? And then she showed me number two, and she asked me, what are you going to do about that? And we went through all of them. It was actually a Christmas evening some years ago, and we went through all of them, and we concluded that education is probably one of the keys to making the world a better place, but we didn't know anything about education. So we decided to try to make the world a better place through robotics. And actually, robotics can also have a very positive impact on the world if you start looking into it. A lot of the problems the world is facing can be, you can say, at least alleviated or soothed with robotics, if not solved. So we think there's a lot of good to be done with robotics, and we also think there's, you can say, a lot of money to be made in robotics. So that combination of doing good and doing well is what we are going for in Reinvest Robotics. We invest in robot startups that have, you can say, some positive aspects in terms of doing good for the world that are aligned with the UN sustainability goals. And that's, this is my wife we're showing here.
Oh, okay, right. So this is your new project. When did you start this Reinvest?
I started in 2019 when I left Universal Robots.
Right. Okay. And you're motivated by, I suppose, the new trend. Not the new trend. I mean, environmental concerns have existed for many decades, but I think now it's reached a point where it's kind of mainstream. Would you agree? Would you say that it's mainstream now?
Yes.
Is
yeah,
that fair?
But it's
to
not
say?
only environment. There are actually a lot of other things in those UN sustainability goals than environment. Of course, environment is quite a hot topic right now.
Yeah. What other? I mean, the things that come to mind when we're talking about these kind of things. If I could sort of group them together, environmental concerns and sustainability and things like that. I mean, one of the first thing that comes to mind is plastic particles. Microplastics are absolutely everywhere in the whole world. In the oceans, of course, in the snow that comes down, in the rain probably, and in our food chain, all over the place. So that's a very big concern. Cars, internal combustion engine cars, petrol cars that have been polluting the atmosphere for many decades. Yes, the catalytic converter helped a lot. Maybe the automotive industry will come up with an even better catalytic converter that cleans up petrol cars. Who knows? Hopefully they can do something like that. But those cars have been polluting the atmosphere for many years. Those kind of things that for me, come to mind first. And then, of course, you talk. Homes, house building, construction, all these homeless people or people who live in shanty towns and slums and things like that. Electricity, the lack of availability of it in many countries. There are lots of things that come to mind for me when I think about these kind of issues. What are the things that you'd like to tackle, and how would you go about it through your accelerator?
So I don't think we can tackle all of it, but we do believe deeply that there should be good business in solving the world's problems. And we also believe that if we want to solve the world's problems, we need to make business out of it. And exactly how we kind of let it be up to the startups that contact us. Yeah, there's a few of our companies here on the website. So you can see Lifeline Robotics is about, Corona pandemic. You can say it's about testing. It's a swabbing robot that can test for Corona. Then we have FarmDroid below, which is it's sustainable farming. It's a solar-powered de-weeding robot that is avoiding herbicides by doing mechanical weeding instead. And then the third one here is Tutubo, which is an educational robot, like STEM for children, teaching kids how to program. Then we have some other ones that are not on the website yet. But
I could go back to this one. I'm quite interested in the idea of, I mean, that's another thing that there's only so many I can list in the time that I've been, that we have, but yeah, weeding and herbicides and things like that are a very big concern, have been for many, many years. And I heard, or rather I saw a documentary by Deutsche Welle, which is, I don't know if I've said that right, but the German media organization that said the decline or collapse of the bee population in certain countries is to do with no, they weren't categoric. They said there was evidence to suggest that there was something to do with herbicides, or at least some types of herbicide. That's not proven, and I don't want to name any names in case I get into trouble. But that's surely a massive area to tackle. I mean, in terms of, as you say, it would be perfect to tie into a profit motive or a commercial sort of imperative. How's that working out? I mean, and what kind of things are you maybe planning for that one?
FarmDroid in particular is working out really well. They are spreading all over the world right now with their robots, and they're very well adopted. It turns out that the farmers actually get more crop, you can say, out of their fields using these robots than the other methods, depending on how much manual labor they're gonna be using. I mean, if you put a lot of people out there with a hose, you can compete with the robots, but it's not very, you can say, profitable to do it that way. So it's actually a very good business case for the farmers to invest in these robots, and it's really making a difference. And also, as you just mentioned, herbicides. This company, we also have talked to some of the companies making herbicides, and they do have to invent new herbicides almost every other year, because the plants also get resistant to the existing herbicides. So there's an ongoing, I mean, the weeds and the herbicides have this ongoing arms race about outcompeting each other. And even though there is a lot of certification, regulation, and testing required to release a new herbicide onto the market, it's in practice impossible to test all the consequences of what this does. So simply removing herbicides and going back to, you can say, good old-fashioned mechanical de-weeding it seems to be the right thing to do. Also related to FarmDroid, there's another interesting effect. So with these big heavy tractors that is the trend nowadays in conventional farming, the soil gets compressed quite a lot because of the weight of the tractor. And the tractor has to be big and heavy because it needs to have a lot of horsepower to quickly move through the soil at a speed that is not, you can say, that allows the farmer to do other things during his day. He can't sit there all day in the tractor waiting for it to finish the field. So these big heavy tractors, they are not good for the soil either, which has to do with the use of water in the soil and how it absorbs nutrients and so on. So that's another positive effect we found with using these lightweight farming robots. So it's moving very slowly through the field. It takes almost a week for it to cover a field, and then it starts over again, depending on the size of the field, of course. So it basically just lives out there for a season. You can see it going here. It's going quite slowly, but it's de-weeding, and based on GPS, it will put in the seeds, and then it can weed around that GPS coordinate. That's how it works.
Does it use cameras, or does it scoop up everything around the plant, regardless of whether it's weed or anything else?
Yeah, I mean it's GPS based, so it's de-weeding around the GPS coordinate of the seed,
Right, right.
which is actually a good thing because it can de-weed before anything is even visible.
Mm. And when was the first one of these launched, and what kind of, where have you, where are they installed, or which countries or customers have bought them so far?
I think the website would have a list of the countries in which FarmDroid has distributors. I must say I'm not prepared for this question, but I think if you look on the website, we will be able to find where
Yeah.
the distribution. Yeah, find a distributor. Maybe there'll be a map.
Yeah, there you
Yeah,
go.
you can
Well,
see some distributors here.
yeah,
And
I think I've sidetracked you a little bit. Yeah, sorry about that. No, I will get back to the. This is just very interesting. What you're doing is very interesting, and these kind of. I was born in Bangladesh, which
okay.
and we were all farmers back then, and I remember harvests and things like that. I suppose that's probably part of the reason I get interested in these things, but. Yeah, I mean, I'm
Here
sure.
in Denmark, where I'm based, I mean, not my generation and maybe not my parents' generation, but our grandparents' generation, they were all doing de-weeding in the summer vacations. They went out with hose and they just worked on the fields all summer or tried to de-weed, and that was the thing to do. But nobody does that anymore. And I think even during this COVID-19 crisis, a lot of farmers around Europe had trouble getting, you can say, low-cost labor from, you can say, the Eastern European region, and because of lack of labor mobility. And then there was an even bigger need for this kind of robot.
Yeah, I'm just really pleased that you've developed something like this, and obviously with your track record, I'm sure it'd be a phenomenal, fantastic success. And let's hope the herbicide makers, can be pushed back a little bit, because I think no matter how good the herbicides, you're almost always going to have side effects. So I don't mean to be, I don't want to get myself or you into trouble. But anyway, let's move on from that. You recently got involved, or we've covered or published this article, which I've changed the headline slightly, but it's talking about new European regulations and laws regarding manufacturing. I've just called the industry, and you said, or rather your group of roboticists have said they will cause damage, severe damage to European small businesses, robotics companies, and innovation in general. Um, Tell us a little bit about that as an introduction, and then maybe I can follow up with a question or two.
Yeah, so yeah, as is mentioned, the European Commission, it's actually not the AI Act alone, it's also the new proposed machinery regulation. That combination is particularly toxic. So the AI Act is, of course, they're not doing this just to annoy the industry. So it makes a lot of sense to try to, control what these new AI technologies should be allowed to do. I mean, you don't want, these intelligent advertising that's trying to make like some kind of digital drug that will just get people hooked and all that. So there are some of that. I mean, the intention behind it is probably really good, but as most people who are into AI know, there is no. I mean, AI is not really a technology. Similar to robotics, it comes from a tradition of us being afraid of ourselves. A little, I mean, like robotics originally were. And we think we're intelligent, so some artificial intelligence might outcompete us in some way, or might outsmart us in some way. And that's like very deeply a fear we have. But once you start digging into the technology, the definition of AI has been changing over the years. In the beginning, when the first computers came out in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, it was these electronic brains that could do math much faster than any human can do, and they were considered intelligent that way. And then in the 80s, it was the symbolic reasoning that made the chess computers smarter than the human best chess players. And then we had the IBM Watson, and more recently, it's based on neural network and reinforcement learning and acceleration, hardware acceleration of neural networks, and the big data. It's kind of what we call AI these days. But AI as such is not really a thing you can define. I think the modern version of AI you can more or less translate to statistics. And statistics sound a lot less scary than AI, but it is in fact what it is most of the time. It's based on big data, and it's taking decisions based on this big data, based on statistics, basically. So trying to regulate against statistics is not really, you can say, the right way to go. You have to regulate against what you want to avoid, which is, the harmful effects that you don't want in society. Could be no advertisement based on individual consumer data or something like that. Instead of trying to prevent a specific technology. And that's where we come back to one of your first comments. When we started Universal Robots, you talked about the standards for robot safety, which we in fact were not aware of when we started Universal Robots. We just saw a need for a more flexible robot and a robot that could be redeployed. And therefore we did not want it to be inside a fence where all the existing robots were. So we tried to make a safe robot that could work outside fences to simply avoid having to put up this fence with the floor space requirements and so on that would bring. So we'd learned a lot about the existing safety standards when we started Universal Robots over the years. And fortunately, the law in Europe is not requiring us to follow any specific technology, because the current machinery directive in Europe, which is the law these days, says a lot of things, but in essence, it says machines should be safe. And then there is a whole set of standards below that law that are not themselves the law, but if you follow the standard and you comply the standard, if it's a harmonized standard, then you automatically comply with the law, but you're not strictly required to comply with the standard, which opens room for innovation, of course. You can make other ways to achieve the word of the law than following these standards. And these standards are layered. So some of them are very high level, which basically says what is safe and how safe is the norm, the standard. And then some of them are more further down, which is more technical specifications or more open to interpretation. So this whole hierarchy of standards has come to be with a lot of experience. So it all started with the sawmills and the horrible work conditions that workers in the UK in the first industrial revolution got some pretty horrible injuries and got their arms chopped off in steam engines and sawmills. And of course, that's not acceptable to have a work environment like that. So this standardization work had to start, and there had to be some legislation preventing people from getting these horrible injuries while going to work. And in the beginning, that legislation also mentioned specific technologies, how to design your steam engine, how to design your saw, and so on. But over the years, it evolved into being more high level, more abstract, you can say, more describing what we want to achieve, namely machines should be safe. And then all the specifics on how to make them safe were moved out of the law and into the standards and substandards and substandards of substandards, and this whole ISO standardization universe that we have today. So, and I know quite a lot about this because, as you know, our robot was not intended to be, the safety part of Universal Robots was not the main purpose of starting it, but it's something we had to learn a lot about because it's one of the big controversies of Universal Robots is this claim that it can be working alongside people outside of a fence. So yeah, so the problem the politicians are doing again now is they're again trying to, or I don't know if it's the politicians or if some people in the system, but anyhow, the problem with the new regulation here of the AI Act is they're trying to prevent specific technologies, and even they're trying to define AI, which doesn't really make much sense to me. So they should instead, not go that way and say what is we want to achieve and then make a law based on that. And uh, uh, the new proposed machinery regulation even says that if a machine has AI in its safety function, then it's by definition a dangerous machine, and it has to be third-party certified, which at first glance seems reasonable. I mean, if you have a machine with AI built into the safety function of the machine, then yes, that sounds like it should be certified before it can be taken into use. But then when you combine that with not really knowing what AI is, then it becomes more or less a machine with any software in the safety function. Because the AI definition is something like statistics, logic, reasoning, knowledge. If that kind of thing is built into the machine safety function, then it is AI, and therefore, per definition, a machine that needs to be third-party certified. And that will end up being more or less all machines that has to be third-party certified before they can be taken into use. And that's a huge problem.
Well, let me try and unpick or deconstruct some of the things you said. Obviously, this is if I can, if I can characterize it as being quite far-sighted in its in your response to the European Commission and their own attempts at trying to articulate a law or set of regulations for artificial intelligence. The first bit I do understand. You're saying that artificial intelligence is difficult to define, and you're saying it's basically statistics. I kind of understand that because I heard a phrase once that I read somewhere that today's artificial intelligence is tomorrow's automation. So in the first days of optical character recognition, where you could scan a piece A4 side of text and the computer could recognize the letters and then type them up on its own onto the computer, saving you some copy typing, basically, back in the days of journalism when computers were beginning to come in. That was thought of as artificial intelligence, I think, or at least that's the article that I read. I didn't think about it at the time because artificial intelligence as a phrase wasn't used anywhere near as much as it is now. But I do understand, obviously, that OCR or optical character recognition thing, that can't really be described as artificial intelligence in the way we understand it now. I mean, now we understand it, or we think of it as far more powerful, capable of doing a hell of a lot more things. Understanding images and how they connect together, moving images, all sorts of things it can understand. But at its base root, it is about big data.
Yes.
Millions, possibly billions of images that it's ingested or taken in. And it's basing decisions on that. Again, it's statistics, it's probability. Is this picture like any of the pictures that I've got in my database? And if so, these are the things to do about. I can understand that. That's your point of view, but I can also understand not understand, but at least guess at the European Commission's or the regulators' attempts at trying to safeguard people against what are very, very big, powerful companies. I'm talking about the Googles of the world, the Facebooks of the world, the Amazons of the world, using AI to basically overwhelm people's decision making. I mean, now we don't have to think about what we want when we go to different websites. All the products that we showed the remotest interest in at various times through the day or week will keep coming back at us through the form of ads. And sooner or later, we'll buy something. And that's one very small example of how artificial intelligence or just statistics can be made to work. On the one hand, it's in our favor. You know, we want these products, we showed an interest, and maybe we appreciate it that they're close at hand. We just have to click them and then buy them. On the other, we don't really want to be followed around by this AI and things like that. So the GDPR Act or regulation um, was an attempt to sort of limit the amount of data that big companies can collect and use against us, if I can put it that way. And I'm not sure how much of an effect it has on advertising, but you know, I think it seems wrong that only a very small number of companies have become so powerful. They control half of all online advertising. You're talking tens or hundreds of billions of dollars a year spent on advertising, and just maybe 2 or 3 companies control half of it. That I don't know, that's got to be something to do with the amount of computing that they've had, the amount of data they've been able to ingest, and for want of a better phrase, the ability to use artificial intelligence. And so I can understand their point of view, or European Commission's point of view, of wanting to maybe stop big companies becoming too powerful, and you know, by extensions, machines becoming too powerful to the point of being autonomous and making the wrong decisions in their operation. I mean, let's think of real world examples. Autonomous cars are being developed at a very fairly brisk rate. So, and autonomous machines in the warehouses and so on. The possibility of collision, the possibility of autonomous to the point of harming humans, it is there, right? It is there. You know, would you agree, or would you say that?
I completely agree, and with everything you said. The only thing I have to add is that the existing machinery directive actually prevents using any of these technologies as part of the safety function. So, because you have to be very, I mean, it's not easy to make a safe machine according to the current law. And you need to have a very clear understanding of how the safety function works and exactly what can go wrong in it and what will happen in different failure modes. And that's more or less impossible to achieve using these new techniques, neural networks, deep learning, the things that are today called AI. And so the risk is not really there with the existing legislation. So I completely agree. There needs to be some control and regulation over this. And you're right. We don't want a few big companies to own all our data and then use AI to keep us hooked and addicted to their services. That's for sure. But interesting, all these companies are in the US and they're a little bit outside the GDPR. And there's also a risk by legislating too hard that we will kill, you can say, the European way of doing things, and then simply not have competitive solutions with.
Can I just ask you what machinery? Can you give examples of the types of machinery this might affect the European Commission's proposed legislation or acts or?
Yeah, it's actually all machinery. It's nuclear power plants to robot lawn movers and it also automatic teller machines and whatever other machines you can imagine, farm equipment and so on. So it's pretty wide. Because
so what they're saying is that they don't want AI to make be involved in the safety aspect of it. They don't want the AI to decide what is safe and what is not. Is that what you're saying?
They don't want that, and that makes a lot of sense because nobody wants that. So yes, that's what they're saying. The problem here is, of course, AI is not well defined. So
That's a difficult one. I should have got onto that. I did go on a bit too long anyway, but AI is difficult to define, as I was trying to explain at the beginning with the OCR example.
Yeah, exactly. So, and the existing standards are actually pretty good in preventing dangerous. I mean, I don't know how much you know about machinery safety, but the standard is basically built on how severe the consequence is of a dangerous failure will determine how much safety you have to build into the system to prevent this dangerous failure. And you know, a controller for a nuclear power plant has to be more safe than a train controller, which again has to be more safe than a car controller, and has to be more safe than industrial robot, and you know, and so on all the way down. So and to make a system that complies with these current laws and regulations is very, very difficult to do that with AI, because you have to have complete understanding of what can go wrong in this system, down to the level that if this transistor breaks or short circuits or flies off or can become erratic, then what is the consequence to the integrity of the safety system? And you do all this math and calculation, and there's simply no way you can do that with these technologies that EU is afraid of here. And personally, I'm wondering how the self-driving cars are ever going to get around this, because I don't see how, let's say, suddenly green shoes become fashionable. How can you make sure that no self-driving car will suddenly see these green shoes as a green light? I don't know how they're going to go about that. So I don't. I mean, with the current law and what I know about it, and I do know quite a lot about it, but mostly from the robotics point of view, I don't see a way through with any of these technologies in the current legislation, because it is, you can say, the whole thing is written in blood from all the years of worker accidents, and there is a lot of, you can say, conservatism, but also sense built into it. So I think making a new regulation is gonna, first of all, stir up a lot in this environment. I mean, there'll be some years when nobody really knows what is okay and what is not okay, and how do we do things, which will itself create a lot of damage to the emerging robotics business in Europe. And I think we do have a hope to become one of the tech leaders in robotics in the long term. And then also, if the law is, let me say it, ridiculous, then it will really have a damaging effect on this whole ecosystem. The problem today is not so much the law is wrong. I mean, the problem is that a lot of products are on the market that do not comply with the current law. So it would make a lot more sense to strengthen the control, or check products if they do comply with the law or not. And that would create a lot more worker safety than trying to make a new law that basically makes it impossible to make advanced automatic products, machines in Europe. That won't be good for anything.
I think from the public's point of view, and obviously I'm a member of the public, I'm not an expert in robotics or engineering or anything related to the technical side of it as you are. I mean, we want to be safe. All these cars that may come on the road that are automated, driverless, it's potentially quite a scary experience, so yeah, I suppose on the one hand I support the regulators, the EC, and on the other, as a fan of technology, as a fan of engineering, I do want to see more interesting technologies emerge without being hampered or stopped, essentially. So I'm hoping that there can be some resolution found, and I certainly think that there's a lot of engineering companies in Europe, and some of the biggest car makers in the world in Europe, and obviously very well that in terms of robotics, it's really coming up in in that sector, Denmark is a particularly successful hub for robotics, partly as a result of universal robots and what you did. So there's a lot at stake. Automation kind of is being rediscovered. A new wave of automation is sweeping the world. So it'd be good to see that being developed. And I can't see European regulators doing too much to stop that. But what you're saying, I suppose, is you're basically warning people that it is possible that new regulation could hamper that. And you're not alone, of course. You're from, as we said earlier, Reinvest Robotics, but the other organizations that have signed up to this warning, if you like, to the EEC, European Commission, VDMA, which is the German Engineering Association, I think, and International Federation of Robotics, another very long-established, well-known organization representing the robotics community. So all of them are obviously concerned about this. What do you think the resolution will be, and how long do you think it will take? Are you going to enter into some sort of liaison consultancy with the EC? Are you going to meet people? Are you going to make representations to them? And what do you think? How do you think you can influence the process going forward? And when, according to how these things work, when do you think some sort of resolution can be found? How long from now?
Yeah, so first I have to say I can only speak for myself here. So you would have to talk to Patrick or Susanne to hear their opinions on things too. But I'm of course looking from you can say startup or emerging technology point of view, and that's where I can really see the damage here. And I would be happy to get in dialogue with some of the legislators to do that. So I'm not sure how to do that. I don't know this political system in EU so well. I did meet Margrethe Vestager once, and I know she seems to be a very, you could say, reasonable person. So if she wants to talk, I'd be happy to do that with her. But I must say I don't know the European legislation process very well. I can just see that this is a disaster in the making, and that's why I want to shout out and say this is not going to be good for anything. But knowledge,
sorry, go on.
Should be against the things we fear with this new technology and the new opportunities that the technology brings, which can be used for good and bad. But we should also be really careful to not basically make Europe irrelevant in the global competitive landscape, which is exactly what we're going to do with this new proposal.
Yeah, I think, you see, I've covered robotics a little while, and I see innovations happening in other parts of the world more quickly. And that's because they have less regulations, fewer regulations. Exactly, so you have, for example, delivery robots and other kinds of things.
It's already pretty bad here, so we shouldn't make it worse. And this is, you're right. I mean, it's not the technology that's really holding a lot of stuff back from being able to be possible. It is the regulation that's holding it back in Europe mostly.
Yeah, I would argue that you have the emergence of giant computing companies from America, partly as a result of the less regulation in the US. I think in Europe you had more regulations, and therefore giant Google type companies or Facebook type companies didn't emerge. And you're probably going to see similar things happening in China. So it'd be interesting to see how this develops, and good luck to you. And we'll probably get in touch with VDMA and do a similar kind of interview. It is a bit technical at the moment from the point of view of ordinary readers to understand. So it'd be quite interesting to see real world examples of how it can affect the development of things. Say, for example, if Europe made it difficult for the automotive companies to develop autonomous technology, for example, and they may be hampered for a few years, American car companies or even Chinese car companies might come out with more autonomous functions, cars that are more autonomous in everyday life.
And it's a global world. There's only one winner. So if you do something that makes it slightly worse for European companies, then there'll be, it won't be a European company that's going to win a global race.
Yeah, but as I say, I add that the problem is that from my point of view, it's kind of reassuring that regulators are looking at these things and trying to keep us safe.
Yes.
But the problem is, as you say, it's a global world. If Europeans can't develop certain things, there'll be other companies, countries that develop those things, and they bring them over here. So we kind of, as consumers, we can't really avoid them, or they'll be here.
No, but that's kind of what I'm saying. They should put more focus on making sure that the products that are here do comply with the current law. And they should probably, in this case, also consider, is the current law sufficient to prevent what we are afraid of, which I'm not sure they have done in this case. So that's kind of my main message here is that, and then of course also general shout out to keep a lot of focus on the harmful effects of what will happen if this goes through.
Mm. And when is it likely to be finalized or go through? Do you know?
I know there are negotiations going on, but I am not very involved in the process. So I think I would not be the right person to comment on that.
Right, okay. Well, definitely the proposal, well, at least one of the bits of legislation was proposed in April this year. So I don't know when it's going to be final. This is just a proposal. When it's going to be finalized, whether there's going to be a discussion about it, I don't
There
know.
was a discussion last week, as far as I know, but I'm not an insider.
Yeah, well, maybe you should get involved in these things. Certainly, you've got the technical knowledge and business background to make a contribution. It'd be good to see you in those kind of contexts, saying what you think is the best way to go. Because a lot of the time, these are very, very, very new, never done before sort of technologies. So a lot of people don't know what to do. There's a lot of research involved, and it's easy to assume or take for granted our own knowledge. Sometimes we think what we know is not really, you know, different from what other people know. But it's not always the case. What you know might be a lot more than what other people know. So it'd be interesting to see you get involved in things like that. I'll definitely contact the others, see if they have a contribution to make to this. But I think that's all the questions I have. Is there anything that you'd like to add that I didn't ask about this or any other subject?
No, I think you had excellent questions, and you clearly also know a lot about what's going on. So, I don't have anything to add.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And it's been a pleasure talking to you finally. I've only heard your name in the past and obviously your achievements and things like that. So it's great to finally talk to you. Congratulations on a fantastic career so far. I'm sure it'll be even better going forward. You certainly have, some very interesting things in the pipeline. I've got no doubt that we'll be hearing a lot more about you going forward. Is there anything that you've got in mind for America? I mean, you're big in Europe, if you like, but is there a sort of American idea that you might have, or idea to break America, or idea to break China, or anything like that you might have?
To break, I'm not sure about that.
Breakers back in the day, they used to use that as a phrase about musical bands.
Okay, that way
Yeah,
break.
yeah.
I mean, my view is that the world is becoming, smaller and smaller with the new technologies. We're more and more in this together. So I think I'm of course always for collaboration, and we have only one planet, so Universal Robots is all over the world, and I don't see why other robot companies also won't take the same journey and become global quite quickly. robotics is sufficiently, you can say, capital intensive to develop that you kind of have to be global to make it. So I don't think we need to consider Europe alone. And of course, this is a shout out to European politicians that we shouldn't damage. And it's because I personally believe in the European values, which is more about the individual freedom and all this, the rights of the individual. And I think that's the world I want to live in. So I don't want Europe to be irrelevant in the bigger scheme of things. And that's why I'm shouting out now.
Do you think there is a chance that it might happen? Obviously, you do. European.
I mean, no superpower is a superpower forever, and Europe had the lead some years ago. Slowly, it's drifting away, and the world is probably also becoming more equal over time. So it's not a given that Europe will, stay relevant forever.
Okay. Thanks very much, Esben. I really appreciate your time. Sorry if I've gone over a little bit in that time, but I thank you very much for your time and insights.
Okay, thank you.
Send us an email at sales@roboticsandautomationnews.com to register for one of our many upcoming webinars. And if you'd like us to host your webinar, we have a range of options, including long-term lead generation packages and marketing campaigns. We look forward to hearing from you soon.